Story 1, Whispers in Yard C, by Just a Little Unwell. I usually don't share this story, mainly because when you say you've been in a mental institution, people give you that look. You know the one, the are you batshit crazy kind of stare. But I need to get this off of my chest. So I was admitted to Hillcrest Mental Facility when I was 19, anxiety and depression and all that jazz. It wasn't like in the movies with padded cells, more just a really sterile hospital vibe. The staff was okay, some nice, some you'd wish you'd never met. But this isn't about them. About 2 weeks into my stay, they shifted me from the relatively calm Ward B to Ward C. Now, Ward C was known for housing patients with, shall we say, more intense kind of psychosis. The nurses said it was because they needed to make room elsewhere and assured me it was temporary. My new roommate was Lisa. When I first walked in, she was lying on her bed, perfectly still, just staring at the ceiling. She was around my age, with raven black hair and these piercing blue eyes. Something about her immediately put me on edge, but I figured I was just anxious about the change. I introduced myself and she didn't respond, didn't even glance my way. Again, weird, but I had seen weirder since my stay began. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard it, a low whisper. I couldn't make out what was being said, but I was sure it came from Lisa's bed. My heartbeat quickened, but I tried to reassure myself, thinking maybe she was just talking in her sleep. But then she sat up. This went on for a couple of nights. Lisa would sit up in the middle of the night, listen to the whispers I couldn't hear, then lie back down. One morning, trying to convince myself I was going crazy, I mustered up the courage to ask her, "Were you talking to someone last night?" She looked at me for the first time since I moved in, her stare cold and unnerving. "They talk. I listen. You should too," she replied. I didn't know how to respond. I thought maybe it was a coping mechanism, some sort of hallucination she had, but it didn't make me feel any better. One night, the routine changed. After the usual whispering, Lisa stood up and started walking to my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut, pretending to be in a deep sleep. I felt her standing over me, her breathing uneven. She leaned down, her mouth just inches from my ear, and whispered, "They know you hear them too." I didn't dare move. After what felt like hours, she went back to her bed. The next morning, I asked for a ward change, but there was no availability, so I was stuck in Ward C. I tried sleeping with earplugs, but one night, even with them firmly in, I was jolted awake, not by a whisper, but by a shout. Lisa was standing over my bed, screaming, "Why won't you listen?" Nurses rushed in, sedating Lisa. I was shaking, drenched in sweat. After that incident, I was swiftly moved back to Ward B. I never saw Lisa again, but sometimes in the dead of night, when everything is silent, I think I hear the faintest of whispers, and I make sure I don't listen. Story 2, Echoes from Room 217, by follower until the end. Hey everyone, I'm writing this to share a disturbing encounter I had back when I was 19. I never really talked about it before. Maybe because I hoped to forget it, or maybe because I thought people wouldn't believe me. Anyway, here goes. I used to volunteer at an old mental institution. It was for the elderly and those with chronic psychiatric issues. Most of the wards were fairly modern, but the old part of the hospitals still had some of those ancient rooms with the high ceilings and the small peep windows on the doors. There was this one particular room, room 217, that wasn't used anymore. The nurses told me it was kept shut because of renovations, but I'd never seen anyone working on it. The older patients, they'd whisper about that room. They'd say it was special. I always assumed they meant haunted or something, but they'd just look away and refuse to elaborate. One evening, as I was finishing my rounds, delivering meds and such, I realized I'd left my jacket in the patient's room, somewhere near room 217. The hallway was dimly lit, and the air felt different, colder and thick, almost suffocating. As I approached room 217, I heard what sounded like faint sobbing from the other side. Curiosity got the best of me. I peeked through that tiny window, and what I saw was an empty room. But the crying, it continued, louder and clearer, as if it was coming from right in front of me. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. When I pushed the door open, the crying instantly stopped. An eerie silence filled the room. I quickly checked the corners to see if there was anyone, maybe a lost patient or something, but there was no one. Just then, a feeling washed over me, like I was being watched. I turned around, and to my horror, there, reflected in the window, was a young girl, not much younger than me, with long disheveled hair, eyes swollen and red from crying, in what looked like a patient's gown from the 60s or 70s. She looked so real, so solid. It was no ghostly apparition, but when I turned to face her directly, she wasn't there. I bolted out of that room and rushed to the nurse's station. Breathless and shaken, I asked about the girl in room 217. The nurses and the older lady who'd been there for ages went pale. She told me that decades ago, a young woman was admitted against her will. She was different, maybe on the spectrum or something. But back then, that was enough for families to put their embarrassments away. The girl was reported very scared and always felt trapped. She'd cry by the door, hoping someone would hear her and let her out. One day, they found her lifeless in room 217. They said it was suicide. From that day, the room was unofficially closed. The thing is, as the nurses recounted this story, I could feel someone standing behind me, watching. I was too scared to turn around, but I didn't need to. In the reflection of the glass cabinet in front of me, I saw her again, standing silently. I blinked, and she was gone. I quit the next day and never went back, but that face, that moment, stays with me. Every time I see my reflection, I half expect to see her standing behind me. I'm not sure what I encountered that night, and I still don't know if I believe in spirits. But if that wasn't a ghost, then what the hell was it? Story 3, The Corridor Encounter, by Unc Lean. All right, I'll tell you this one time, and then I never want to talk about it again. I don't usually share this experience because it still gives me chills. I used to work as a janitor at an old mental institution, one of those places that time seemed to have forgotten. It was a job, you know. I needed the money. It wasn't like I had to deal with the patients directly. But there was this one night, something happened that I just can't explain. No ghosts, No spirits, none of that mumbo jumbo. Just raw, terrifying moment that I'll never forget. It was about 11:30 p.m. and I was running a bit behind on my cleaning schedule. The hallways were dark, and the only sounds were the occasional moans and mutterings of the rooms of the patients. I always tried to ignore those sounds. It was easier that way. I was always working on the 3rd floor, a floor where I particularly hated due to its long, dimly lit corridor. Halfway down, there was a small window that always seemed to have this weird, cold breeze blowing through it, even in the summertime. That night, as I was pushing my cart down the hallway, I noticed something different. The lights were flickering more than usual. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the old wiring acting up again. As I was about to turn the corner, I heard a noise that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was like a scratching sound, followed by a soft whimper. My heart started racing. It was coming from one of the rooms I had just cleaned. I know I should have just kept going, but something made me turn back. I went to the door, hesitating for a moment before I slowly opened it. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering hallway lights. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary at first, but then I saw it. A shadow, human-like, standing in the far corner of the room. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shadow was not cast by anything I could identify. It was just there, lurking. Without thinking, I reached for the light switch and flipped it on. The room remained dark. The light had failed, but the shadow was still there. And now, I could hear breathing. I don't know how long I stood there paralyzed by fear. It felt like an eternity. And then, suddenly, the shadow moved. It took a step towards me. I bolted, leaving my cleaning cart behind and sprinting down the hallway as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the ground floor. I never went back to that floor again. They found someone else to clean it. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I mean, who would believe me? I left that job a few months later. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. That something was lurking in that dark corner, waiting. I still have nightmares about it. I still hear the scratching sound and that soft whimper. I know it wasn't a ghost or anything like that, but it was something unexplainable, something real, and it scared the life out of me. So that's my story. Believe it or not, I don't really care. All I know is that I'll never forget that corridor, that shadow, that cold breeze from the small window. I'll never forget the corridor encounter.